From amazing geysers to the fact that it's sitting on an active supervolcano. Stay tuned to number 1 to find out the craziest facts about Yellowstone National Park. Number 10. Yellowstone is really big. One of the things that sets Yellowstone National Park apart from various other parks is its size. Yes, it's not the biggest park in the United States. That would be Wrangell-St. Elias in Alaska, but it is rather impressive in terms of scope. In fact, you could put both the states of Delaware and Rhode Island into the Yellowstone Park and have room to spare. Here's another interesting fact. Yellowstone isn't nestled within one state. It's actually in 3. You'll find most of Yellowstone in Wyoming, but you'll also find parts of it in Idaho and Montana. That's another piece of proof of just how big it is. Yet that's still not the only identifier for its total size. But this is. It's the features that make it so big. You see, the Yellowstone National Park has a major amount of geothermal features, like geysers and steam vents and even hot springs. There are so many of them packed within Yellowstone that it actually holds half of the world's geothermal features. Half! All within one park. Really puts size into perspective, doesn't it? Number 9. No one believed the stories about geysers. We all know the phrase, seeing is believing, right? Because sometimes an idea or theory or sighting is so out of this world that it can't be believed until we see it with our own 2 eyes. Now usually, you'd associate this kind of logic with something like Bigfoot or aliens. But within the early days of the United States, geysers were something that people had a hard time believing in. It may seem odd in context, but think about it. The early settlers were on the eastern coast of the United States, and thus didn't have access to geysers. And there clearly weren't ones in Europe where they lived. So when a man named John Coulter went through Wyoming and saw the geysers of Yellowstone and then tried to describe them to others, what do you think they thought? That he was crazy. Water shooting out of the ground with incredible power and shooting out steam as it did? To them, it was madness. But the most ironic thing of all, when you think of Yellowstone National Park now, you think of Old Faithful and the other geysers of the park. I guess they finally believed. Number 8. A painter helped create Yellowstone. Sticking with history a bit longer, let's talk about how Yellowstone National Park got officially made. For it didn't just happen, especially not in those days. But before we learn about its discovery, take a moment to like this video and join the Zero to Hero community by using the buttons below. Yellowstone had to be discovered, explored, and then talked about to those in power. The first officially funded expedition into the park was done in 1871. This expedition had many people on it, including the leader, Ferdinand Hayden. Along with him was a plethora of botanists, biologists, and somewhat surprisingly, an artist. But then again, with camera technology not being anywhere at the time, they needed someone to make a visual depiction of the land. This artist's name was Thomas Moran. Thomas Moran used his time in what would later become Yellowstone to great effect. He made over 30 watercolor paintings of the region, depicting various parts of the park in great detail. At first, the paintings were only shown to the people who were amazed by them, but then they were later shown to members of Congress. Why? Well, because many people wanted to make this region a national playground, and they needed Congress's approval to do so. The pictures were so lovely that Congress agreed that this place should be preserved for all time. And thus, Yellowstone National Park became the first official national park in U.S. history. Number 7. The truth about Old Faithful. As I noted earlier, when you think about Yellowstone National Park, you don't just have your mind go to the geysers of the park, but more specifically, you think about Old Faithful. This legendary geyser is different from all of the other geysers in the park. Did I mention that there are 300 of them in Yellowstone? Because Old Faithful has a frequency to it that has to be admired. In fact, people have timed the gaps between the eruptions and found that they are about 92 minutes between eruptions, give or take. Because of this, Old Faithful erupts around 17 times a day. But as time goes on, people have noted that Old Faithful isn't as reliable as she once was, or as they think she is. In fact, the gap between her eruptions has actually increased over the last few decades, which means that this could continue on for future decades until it takes a lot longer for her to blow her top. Here's another fun fact. You might be under the impression that Old Faithful is the biggest geyser in Yellowstone National Park. Well, it isn't. The biggest geyser there and the biggest geyser in the world in terms of water shooting height is Steamboat Geyser. This incredible geyser can shoot water up to 300 feet in the air. Not bad, huh? Number 6. A stranded explorer. While it is certainly easy enough to get lost in the world today, even with the advancements of our technology, back in the 1800s, getting lost was a much bigger deal. For if you weren't careful, you could pass away within a short amount of time. This almost happened to a man named Truman Everts, who found himself lost in 1870 within what would soon be Yellowstone National Park. How did this happen? Well, before it was a national park, it was just an area that people would travel to and explore, and thus, a team of surveyors was going to the land to see what it was all about. Among them was Everts, who wasn't exactly a survival expert. In fact, he was a bureaucrat. So imagine his horror when he got separated from the group, and when his group couldn't find him in the park, they left him behind. Usually, this would spell out a death sentence, but in this case, Everts was able to stay alive. And he stayed alive for 37 days until he was found by another group of people. While he did live, including being nursed back to health, it did take a toll. He weighed only 90 pounds when he was rediscovered, and frostbite had done serious damage to his feet. There is an upside here though. Because of this experience, Everts wrote a book called 37 Days in Peril, and it became a hit, and that led to a serious momentum in making Yellowstone a national park. Number 5. Where do the geysers come from? The geysers are a big part of Yellowstone National Park. In fact, they make up a large part of its identity. But here's the question. Do you know where they all came from? For while one can be easily explained based on the land it's on, when you have 300 of them in a single area, yeah, that's a lot to factor in. In fact, this was one of the reasons that people didn't believe in geysers at first, because there were so many seen by the explorers. Once scientists got involved though, it was revealed that Yellowstone National Park is actually on top of a supervolcano. Yep, a supervolcano. In fact, it's the largest supervolcano in all of North America. So the question is the volcano active? Yes it is. But you shouldn't fear an eruption just yet. Based on scientific research, the last eruption was 640,000 years ago, at the best guess. And it doesn't seem to be in any mood to erupt right now. That being said, should it get the urge to erupt? Yeah, it would basically destroy the United States in one form or another. Number 4. The park can kill bison. No, I don't mean that humans have the right to kill bison in the park, thankfully, but rather that the park itself actually has the ability to unintentionally kill bison. And can you guess why? Yep, it's the geysers. How does that work? Well, the Norris Geyser Basin has the ability to produce toxic emissions, gases in more simplistic terms. So much of a problem were these gases that in 2004 a group of 5 bison walking by the basin were said to have died because of the toxic emissions. And this wasn't the first time this has happened either. For in 1899, a group of bears died in basically the same way. Thankfully for all animals, this is not a regular occurrence, but it can be possible, further showing how dangerous geysers and the park can be. Number 3. Military protected Yellowstone. So in 1872, Yellowstone National Park was officially born. Happy ending right then and there, right? Not even a decade later, in 1882, Congress had pulled all funding from Yellowstone, leaving it open for all sorts of businesses and poachers to ravage the landscape. One man in particular was aghast by this, General Philip Sheridan. This Civil War leader was a believer in nature and saw the events going on as heinous. Therefore, being a general, he made an order to send military troops to Yellowstone in order to protect the land from all sorts of invaders and disturbances. Known as the Spread Eagle Men, the soldiers of Yellowstone protected the park until 1918 when the National Park Service took over the job. But still, had it not been for Sheridan and his men, Yellowstone National Park may look very different from what it is now. Number 2. Wonderland. It must have been quite a sight to the settlers from Europe to see a park like this in the United States. So it's not much of a surprise that they had all kinds of nicknames for Yellowstone. But in 1883 and on, one stuck out above the rest. Wonderland. Yeah, like Alice in Wonderland. In fact, the release of the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland helped ensure visitations to the park. They even made an ad with Alice explaining all of the wonders she saw in this new Wonderland. Even back then, they knew how to advertise. Number 1. Earthquake. When you hear the word earthquake, your instinct might be to hide underneath a table and hold on for dear life. And that's a good instinct. You might also think that earthquakes won't happen in a place like Yellowstone. But in fact, the opposite is true. They happen all the time. Between 1,000 and 3,000 earthquakes happen in Yellowstone every year. It gets better, or worse, depending on how you see things. In 2010, there were 250 earthquakes at Yellowstone in the course of just 48 hours. So why do people still go there if it's so dangerous? Well, it's not actually. You see, although there are earthquakes there, not all of them can be felt. They're tiny and quick and don't shake the ground that much. There are some bigger ones, sure, but they're nothing like the monstrous ones we all hear about on the news. But if you do feel the earth move when you're at Yellowstone, now you know why. Have you ever been to Yellowstone? Let us know about it in the comments below and take care.